Welcome to this Cathedral History podcast. Cathedral guide Margaret McBride introduces us to St Benedict and the Benedictine Window in the Beauchamp Chapel. We hope this podcast will encourage you to visit Norwich Cathedral. Our opening times are given on the website.
St Benedict was born around 480 AD at Nursia in central Italy, the son of a Roman noble. At about the age of 20, disappointed with his life in Rome, where he had gone to study, Benedict retired from the world and chose to live as a hermit in a cave above the river Anio, near Subiaco, south of Nursia, on the way to Naples. Here he was supplied with the needs of life by a monk living in a monastery above the cliff overhanging the cave, and the monk's attention would be drawn by Benedict ringing a bell. It was during his 3 years of solitude, and with only the occasional meeting with the outside world, that Benedict matured in mind and character, both in the knowledge of himself and of his fellow man. He secured the respect of those around him, and having acquainted himself with the life and discipline of the monastery, he was called to become the abbot of a neighbouring monastery. However, the experiment failed, with the monks trying to poison him. Legend has it that on one occasion, when his food had been poisoned, by timely intervention a raven descended, plucked the bread and flew away with it, thus saving Benedict's life. To avoid the other temptations which were being directed at him, Benedict left Subiaco in about 530 AD. He founded 12 monasteries in the vicinity of Subiaco before eventually founding the great Benedictine monastery of Monte Cassino, which lies prominently on a hilltop between Rome and Naples. This is where, in 547, he died and was buried. One of Benedict's achievements is his compilation of the Rule of Benedict, drawing on older rules and traditions, but shaping it in a distinctive way and imbuing it with his own charism. Written in 516, it is a set of rules for monks to live communally under the authority of an abbot. Consisting of 73 short chapters, its wisdom is twofold. On the one hand, spiritual wisdom of how to live a Christocentric life on earth, and on the other, administrative wisdom of how to run a monastery efficiently. Its unique spirit of balance, moderation and reasonableness persuaded most Christian religious communities founded throughout the Middle Ages to adopt the rule, and as a result it became one of the most influential religious rules in Western Christendom. For this reason, Benedict later came to be regarded as the founder of Western Christian monasticism. At Norwich Cathedral, to the right of the west door and installed for the millennium, stands a statue of St Benedict. David Holgate, the sculptor, has managed to capture St Benedict with his finger to his lips, emphasising the very first word of his rule, listen. And in the Latin inscription on the book, the sculptor has added further weight to that instruction, listen. The Benedictine window was designed by Mauro Forsyth, an established stained glass artist of the 20th century. It is of a modern narrative design made by Dennis King of King and Son of Norwich and installed in the cathedral in 1964. Mauro Forsyth's typical work is reflected in the use of slab glass, in the cross-hatching achieved by the scratch and scribble method of stained glass painting, and by the soft and subtle colours inspired by the arts and crafts movement. The main panels are designed to be interpreted from left to right and from top to bottom. And the window was given in honour of Julian of Norwich and to the beloved memory of Harriet Mabel Campbell, who died in 1953. Centrally placed in the tracery towards the top of the window is a cross inscribed with the word Pax, peace, whilst lower down, across the two inner panels, can be found the inscriptions Ora et Labora, pray and work, and Ut in omnibus glorificator Deus, so that in all things God may be glorified. 3 distinct Benedictine mottos or emphases. Looking now at the main body of the window and to the images shown on the outer left panel, we can see 2 images of St Benedict. At the top, St Benedict is depicted in his earlier life as a hermit praying, and as told in the legend, above flies the raven with the poisoned bread. The shield to the right depicts the arms of St Benedict's Abbey near Ludham, The name Bennet is an English version of the name Benedict. In the second image, St Benedict is shown with the Rule of Benedict. The Latin inscriptions Opus Dei, Lectio Divina, Opus Manuum translates as the work of God, divine reading, manual labour. Opus Dei refers to the liturgical prayer of the community, and Lectio Divina, first established by Benedict in the 6th century, is a traditional monastic practice of scriptural reading, meditation and prayer intended to promote communion with God and to increase the knowledge of God's word. The 6 monks shown alongside Benedict are variously engaged in reading, writing and praying. From the practice of wearing black habits, Benedictine monks were commonly referred to as the Black Monks. Coming down to the last image on this panel of St Gregory and St Augustine, we have moved on towards the end of the 6th century. This is St Gregory the Great, who in 590 was the first monk to be elected pope, and St Augustine of Canterbury, not the 3rd, 4th century St Augustine of Hippo in North Africa. Pope Gregory is credited with re-energising the Church's missionary work among the non-Christian people of Northern Europe, often called the Gregorian mission. St Gregory and St Augustine were both monks of the same community in Rome, and in this image, St Gregory is shown blessing St Augustine as he sends him on a mission to England in an attempt to evangelise the pagan Anglo-Saxons. Paganism had been reintroduced to England when the Angles, Saxons and Jutes had invaded and settled in the country following the final withdrawal of the Romans in 410 AD. 2 coats of arms depict at the top right the gold and silver keys of St Peter on a red field, representing the office of Pope Gregory, and at the bottom left the arms of St Augustine, the first Archbishop of Canterbury. A silver cross on a black field with an episcopal staff and pallium at the top left, signifying his archiepiscopal rank, and a lily of the Madonna to the top right, believed to have been included because he died in May, the month of Mary. Moving on to the top of the second panel, we come to a scene dated 597 AD. St Augustine has arrived in England, in Kent, with a number of Benedictine monks. They are seen in procession being received by King Ethelbert of Kent, and as described by Bede in his ecclesiastical history, the monks approach the king carrying a silver cross as their standard and the likeness of our Lord and Saviour painted on a board. King Ethelbert was married to Bertha, the Christian daughter of the King of the Franks, and it is thought that this may have been the reason why Pope Gregory sent St Augustine on the mission to England. As a result of this mission, Ethelbert became the first English king to convert to Christianity and later came to be regarded as the saint for his role in establishing Christianity among the Anglo-Saxons. Ethelbert also provided the new church with land in Canterbury, thus establishing one of the foundation stones of what was ultimately to become the Anglican Communion. Beneath St Ethelbert is an image of St Benedict Bishop. He was born of a noble Northumbrian family in the 7th century and undertook several journeys to Rome. It was on his return from one of these journeys that he stayed for 2 years at a Benedictine monastery, undergoing a course of instruction, taking monastic vows and the name of Benedict. In 674, the King of Northumbria granted Benedict Bishop land at Monk Wearmouth for the purpose of founding and building a monastery. It was Bennett's vision to build a model monastery for England, and, drawing on all his continental experiences of architecture, the monastery at Monk Wearmouth became one of the first ecclesiastical buildings in Britain to be built of stone, and his use of glass was a novelty for many in 7th century England. This monastery so delighted the king that Bennet was granted more land at Jarrow to build a sister foundation. Bennet was also a bibliophile and founded a famous library at Monk Wearmouth, having assembled a large collection of books on his various trips overseas. In the image, St Benedict Bishop is shown holding a glazed window. Behind him are representations of his monasteries at Monk Wearmouth and Jarrow. The shield to Bennett's left is that of the Diocese of Durham, in which both Monk Wearmouth and Jarrow are situated. St Bede, or as he is more commonly known, the Venerable Bede, was a student at Monk Wearmouth. At the age of 7, he had been sent to the monastery at Monkwearmouth by his family to be educated by St Benedict Bishop, later transferring to Jarrow Abbey and taking vows on becoming a Benedictine monk. In addition, around 702, he was ordained to the priesthood. He was well known as an author, teacher and scholar, and his most famous work, The Ecclesiastical History of the English People, written about 731, gained him the title of the Father of English History. At the end of the 19th century, he was declared a saint and also received the title of Doctor of the Church by Pope Leo XIII. He remains the only native of England to have achieved such a designation. In the image, St Bede is shown with a copy of his Ecclesiastical History of the English People. Passing on to the third panel, we are 200 years further on in history, to the 10th century. Here are 3 saints shown in proximity to each other, St Dunstan, St Ethelwold and St Oswald, grouped together since they were all connected with the reforms of the Benedictine order in England. Monastic life had declined to a low ebb in England in the 9th century, partly because of the ravages caused by Viking attacks. Undefended abbeys were an easy target for pagan Viking raiders, partly because of a preference for employing secular clergy, those who lived in the world at large and as such were cheaper to employ than the regular clergy, those who were ordained and living under the rule of life. St Dunstan was an English bishop and archbishop of the 10th century. He was successively Abbot of Glastonbury, Bishop of Worcester, Bishop of London and Archbishop of Canterbury. He was a central figure in the 10th century revival of English monastic life. Whilst at Glastonbury, he set out on his task of reform, to recreate monastic life by instituting the Benedictine rule and to rebuild the abbey, it having been ravaged by Viking raiders. St Dunstan became Archbishop of Canterbury in 960 and is shown here in Archbishop's vestments, wearing the pallium received in Rome from Pope John XII. On Dunstan's left are the arms of the Archdiocese of Canterbury, and to his right the blue shield and gold pyx, alluding to his patronage of English goldsmiths and silversmiths. Among his many talents, he had worked as a silversmith and metalworker during his time at Glastonbury. Another of St Dunstan's many patronages, that of patron saint of bell ringers, is symbolised by the bell included above. St Ethelwold was a 10th century English bishop and also one of the leaders of the monastic reform movement in Anglo-Saxon England. In the 930s, he had moved to Glastonbury Abbey from Winchester, where St Dunstan had been made abbot. Later he moved to Abingdon Abbey, where he too was appointed abbot. In a similar vein to Dunstan, Ethelwold undertook the building of the church, the rebuilding of the cloister and the establishing at Abingdon of the Benedictine rule. In his reforms, St Ethelwold was far more zealous than either St Dunstan or St Oswald. In 963 he was consecrated Bishop of Winchester, an appointment made by Dunstan, now Archbishop of Canterbury. St Ethelwold was bishop during the period when the Winchester School of Manuscript Illumination reached its peak. The most important surviving manuscript of the school, the Benedictional of St Ethelwold, was commissioned by him. He is shown in the image with a copy of the work. He was also responsible for the Regularis Concordia, a customary which shaped the life of all English monastic communities. The red shield, emblazoned with the keys of St Peter and sword of St Paul, signifies the arms of the Diocese of Winchester. The last of the 3 reformers depicted in the window is St Oswald. Not to be confused with the 7th century St Oswald, King of Northumbria, this is St Oswald of Worcester, who lived in the 10th century and was of Danish ancestry. He was brought up by his uncle, who sent him to a French abbey to become a monk and where he was later ordained. On his return to England, his uncle having died, he needed a patron and turned to his kinsman Oswald, who had recently become Archbishop of York. It was whilst he was here that his activity came to the notice of St Dunstan, who had him consecrated Bishop of Worcester in 961. He was later translated to York as Archbishop in 972. As Bishop and Archbishop, St Oswald strongly supported and was also one of the leading promoters of Dunstan's reforms of the church, including the monastic reforms. He founded a number of monasteries, including Ramsey Abbey, his most famous foundation, in Huntingdonshire, and reformed another 7, including Winchcombe in Gloucestershire and Pershaw and Evesham in Worcestershire. He died on the 29th of February 992 in the act of washing the feet of the poor at Worcester, as was his daily custom during Lent. 2 abbeys reformed by St Oswald, presumably one of which is Ramsey Abbey, are shown alongside, whilst the arms of the Archdiocese of York, the cross keys and regal crown on a red field are shown to the right. With the last image of this panel, time has moved on another 100 years, and England is now firmly under the control of the Norman kings and the feudal system. St Anselm was born in Aosta, Italy, around 1033. He left Italy when he was 23, and after several years of wandering and having taken advice from his countryman Lanfranc, Anselm settled at the Abbey of Bec in Normandy, where he was greatly influenced by the Rule of Benedict. Anselm was elected the Abbot of Bec in 1078, and it was under his direction that Bec became the foremost seat of learning in Europe. After the Norman conquest, the Abbey of Bec was given extensive lands in England. Anselm would visit occasionally to oversee the monastery's property, when he would also visit Lanfranc, now Archbishop of Canterbury. Anselm gained the respect of William I, so much so that he became the favourite to become Lanfranc's successor. However, when the time eventually came, William Rufus refused the appointment and appropriated the seized lands and revenues for himself. Thus began a long period of disputes before Anselm was eventually enthroned as Archbishop of Canterbury in 1093, but only after he had given William II his acceptance conditions. Anselm's vision was of a universal church with its own internal authority, which clashed with William II's desire for royal control over both church and state, not only with regard to its land and property, but also in the matter of the right of English kings to invest the bishops of the church. Anselm twice went into exile over these conflicts with both William II and his successor, Henry I. In contrast to William, Henry did support a number of Anselm's reforms and his authority over the English church, but Henry still continued to assert his own authority over Anselm. However, with the Pope threatening to excommunicate Henry I, at a critical period of the king's reign, an agreement was reached in which Henry was forced to make many concessions. In 1107, the Concordat of London formalised the agreements between the king and archbishop, with Henry formally renouncing the right of English kings to invest the bishops of the church. This acceptance of the Concordat is depicted in the bottom image of this panel. Moving on to the 4th panel on the outer right, the interest is now focused on Norwich. At the top of the panel we have an image of Herbert de Singer and William Beauchamp. Herbert de Singer, who became the first bishop of Norwich, was a monk from Normandy. He took his monastic vows at the Benedictine Abbey of Fécamp, of which he was eventually to become the prior. He was invited to England by William II, who appointed him to be the abbot of Ramsey Abbey, the abbey founded by St Oswald. In 1091, Herbert de Singer was consecrated Bishop of Thetford, but within 3 years the see was moved to Norwich, which by then had grown to be the principal town of the diocese, with Herbert becoming its first bishop in 1094. The foundation at Norwich, which was started by Herbert in 1096, served as both a Benedictine priory and as the cathedral of the diocese of Norwich. In the image, Herbert de Singer, in his bishop's vestments, is shown with the monks processing into the Benedictine priory. The monks are carrying timbers, undertaking manual labour, building the cathedral. Towards the end of the procession, William Beauchamp, who was responsible for its foundation, carries a model of the Beauchamp Chapel. Norwich Cathedral is seen at the top, with a Norman spire, together with the shield of the Diocese of Norwich, 3 gold mitres on a blue field, and the shield of the Priory of Norwich, a black cross on a silver field. And lastly, we see Julian of Norwich, variously referred to as Dame Julian, Lady Julian, or Mother Julian. She was a 14th century anchoress who dwelt in a cell attached to the Church of St Julian in Norwich. People will be drawn to her to seek spiritual guidance. In May 1373, while suffering from a serious illness for which she received the last rites, she experienced 16 mystical visions of a crucifix on which she saw the figure of Christ beginning to bleed. Mother Julian wrote about her showings shortly after she experienced them, and the writings, entitled Revelations of Divine Love, are thought to be the first surviving publication by a woman in the English language. There are a number of unknowns about Mother Julian, one of whether she was an anchoress before she experienced the visions, or whether she was led to a more devout life as a result of the visions, and another of whether or not she was a nun of the Benedictine order, taking the vows of stability, fidelity to the monastic way of life, and obedience. There was speculation that she received early instruction at the Benedictine Priory of Carrow, and the priory, located just beyond the city walls, yet within proximity to St Julian's Church, did hold the living of that church. In the image, Mother Julian is shown at the moment of experience one of her showings, and to her right, the Church of St Julian can be seen with the anchorage. Viewing again the whole window, and appreciating the impact that the Benedictine order has had on life over the centuries, brings us round to the daily life of the cathedral. Here at Norwich, the Benedictine ethos is still maintained on a day-to-day basis and is identified across 3 key values: in its worship, with its daily round of services; in its learning, not just through the historic and contemporary libraries, but also through the educational opportunities given to the thousands of school children and students who visit us each year; and in its hospitality and welcome offered to our countless visitors. The Benedictine Window can be found in the Beauchamp Chapel, which is situated in the south ambulatory at the east end of the cathedral, almost level with the high altar. You would be most welcome to come to Norwich Cathedral and to admire this window for yourselves, experience its glory, its history, and its craftsmanship. Thank you for taking the time to listen.